A week ago on TikTok.
Hit me with your best shot, Wheel. The gamble, I see. Finally. Alright.
What the fuck? Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Christened Music Podcast, where, if it's listenable, it's christenable. And, I'm your host, Chris Martins, and today we are going to take a look, at last, at the Corey Feldman album, Angelic to the Core, Angelic Funkadelic / Angelic Rockadelic. Yes, that is the full title. Okay, pull yourself together. This is the third studio album from American singer and former child actor in movies like The Goonies and Stand By Me, Mr. Corey Feldman. He has ventured into music before, but it has not exactly been met with any critical or commercial success. But the dude has been working on this very album for 10 years before its release. 10 years! This album even had a Kickstarter to fund it with a goal of $105,000, of which it only managed to get in just under $15K. Ouch. But despite everything, in 2016, Angelic to the Core was released unto the world. Enter our next character in this 3-act play. The Melon Lord himself, peace be upon him, Mr. Anthony Fantano. He took a listen to this album as it came out because, well, it's his job, and it was so bad that it broke him and his review style. We get to watch a 50-minute reaction of sorts as he goes through the album track by track, and we get to listen along through his tinny MacBook speakers as he descends into an indescribable madness. This is how I and many others were introduced to this album. The worst album of 2016, later the worst album of the 2010s. For a while, I was scared of the opening of Bring the Sun / Toussaint Louverture, an actually good song, because it reminded me too much of the song Negativity on this album. Oh god. Now we get into Act 3 of our tragic tale. For those of you who don't follow my TikTok or Instagram, at Martelins Music for both, by the way, I leave nearly every other album up to fate. Now, oh god, the music gods were not in my favor last week, and they spaketh thus: Review Corey Feldman's Angelic to the Core. I knew that it would be the largest tithe I would ever have to pay to the gods, and that this day would come eventually, no doubt. So after beating around the bush for a couple days, being as optimistic as I possibly could be, I strapped in for the ride of a lifetime. And wow. I got everything I bargained for and more. This album is, without a doubt, the worst album I have ever heard this year so far, and it's not even close. Production is garbage, composition is garbage, singing is hot garbage, and the lyrics are more garbage. It's tempting to just play this album for you, to just show you how bad it is, but Melon Man already did that, and so I'm just gonna do something harder. Let's just talk about this, whatever it is, and maybe, just maybe, we can find solace together. Apologies for the lack of detail from here on in. I just really didn't want to listen to this album again and again. Let's go. Production is bad, mixing is horrible, sound quality is horrible, all of it horrible. It's perhaps the worst I've heard from a studio album. The vocal recording quality just goes out the window fast, especially with the skits. It reminds me of old YouTube skits from 2007, complete with acting and cinematography that would belong in the movie Birdemic. The instruments are buried into themselves. There are points where Corey's vocals are buried in the mix. Some of them are entirely buried, like the front half, and some of them are fine in the beginning, as fine as Angelic to the Core can be, and then they're buried in the mix for some reason. This is nice if you don't want to hear so much of Corey Feldman anymore for any prolonged period of time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's clearly a lot going on with this record, and none of it pans out well. It just turns into this noisy muddle thanks to the mixing and sound quality of each instrument, from guitars to saxes to vocals to electronics. Nearly everything on this record just doesn't sound good. And the worst is when Corey's trying to go epic, like on Working Class Hero, The Closer, and John Lennon cover, and he just shoots himself in the foot with weak production, which just makes the track sound weaker. It's like if the fog from Saint Anger got thicker. This whole album needs a massive overhaul when it comes to production. Just re-record the whole thing. What's there to be said about effects? A large theme around my opinion on this album is at least Corey Feldman tried. At least with this album, there is something there that's creative, but that unfortunately backfired as well. Sometimes there's no stereo sound, and sometimes its inclusion makes me want to wash my ear canals like Forbid in Love. God, what an awful title. Why the fours when you just want to say forbidden, man? For example, the auto-tune is handled so poorly on Love and Lies that it just makes his vocals worse, and the lyrics he's singing are less and less intelligible. Effects just make this album seem like it's even more of a mess than it already is. There's either too much going on, which the production absolutely botches, or it's minimal enough to see all the elements get weakened and or exposed as terrible. Speaking of elements, what's going on here? Composition is just a mess. An unmitigated mess. Again, I apologize if I don't go into much detail as I would normally do about an album's instruments, because to do so, I'd have to listen to this album multiple times. I'll sure as hell try, though. The electronics are okay at first, then get grating over time. Synths are kind of the same way. Guitars are super cheesy on the back half, but not in a fun way. Bass has that cheesy vibe to it as well, or it's completely invisible. Pianos are either flat or play into this cheesy vibe, and it... Oh, no, not this one. And it all culminates on that jazz, I think, song, We Wanted Change. If I showed that to some of the people in my life who are mad into jazz, I'm pretty sure they'd never want to talk to me again. It's just the worst song I've ever heard with a swing beat. Come on, man! Structure is somehow worse. again, what is going on here? Song structure is terrible. The pop song structure is not the issue here, but this album doesn't stick to its guns on any of its many compositional ideas. There are these songs with little intro licks, and then it just stops going where I think it's going to go based on that intro, and then just does something completely different. This isn't the moon by Microphones. I wish Not Enough of a Graceful Warning into the next part of the song was the only problem here. It just completely abandons whatever ideas it has at the beginning, and it just left turns into something like just something else. The idea in question is usually equally as bad, but given the lack of warning, it's worse. What are these cheap fade outs instead of an ending that could tie the song up in a neat little bow? Show me the end of the song, you coward! The second side, Angelic Rockadelic, also has this amp fuzz at the end of half of these songs. It just seems like the producers of this record just forgot to cut that crap out. Speaking of abandoning ideas, what the hell is this album's structure? What is its identity? Why do some of these songs allude to transitions in the next song, and then the next song doesn't follow through on that promise? Oh, my computer's heating up. Oh, it's blood. It's going too. It's going too. Even worse, what are these skits that somewhat have a story and yet don't commit to that fully? It just makes for this clunky mess of an album. There's a long gap between two skits and completely unrelated songs that you basically forgotten about all the Angel stuff, and then there's a "Hey kids, put on disc 2" at the end of test 1 to cap off the end of the Angelic Funkadelic section, which, by the way, isn't even Funkadelic at all. If anything, it's electronic or something. Then there's the Angelic Rockadelic section, which kind of fits that description, but is more Funkadelic than the Funkadelic section, and it has that stupid jazz song on it. Like, speaking of the second half, the first song on that half is called Seamless, and it is the most ironic title for a song I've seen since Swans' She Loves Us. Oh, hey... Hey, Tantacrul, did you ever figure out the opposite of seamless yet? Seamy sounds weird, but it sure would fit an album like this! And every twist and turn is like this fever dream of different ideas and songs, none of which actually pan out or is handled very well. Saint Anger. And I hate Saint Anger. Saint Anger had good ideas and then just ripped that away. And it felt like they had a trapdoor down to a pit of alligators that they just dropped me down into again and again. This album is more relaxed in its approach. You think something almost sounds good, and then you just realize again and again that you're listening to Corey Feldman's Angelic to the Core, and you just calmly return to a baseline misery. We're in DEFCON 1 now, baby. Oh boy. Oh my god. Where to even begin with these lyrics or vocals or anything? Corey Feldman, not a good singer, I'm sorry to say. The tone is terrible. The auto-tune on Love and Lies doesn't even know what's happening, just like the listener. The "we" on "We Need a Change" is just the icing on the flour, yeast, rotten egg concoction that is certainly not cake of terrible vocals on that song and this record. Like, wow, these are bad. The monotone vocals on Ascension Millennium, and the disgusting sounds of Forbidden Love. I'm gonna give you a taste, girl. Seriously, what is with the fours in the titles? The fours! The harmonies on Remember 222 scraping together in the ugliest way I have ever heard in my life. Oh, and throughout the album, the gritty voice that I guess is a Michael Jackson impression is comical at best and gross at worst. But the thing that sends me into a fit of rage the most is that Corey, in the latter half of song after song after song, it's not all of them. It's not all of them, but it's too often not to note, sings off beat. He's singing off beat. This isn't some experimental 2 tempos at once sort of free-form jazz. This is supposed to be pop music, I assume. So, why the hell is Corey Feldman not singing on time? What is this album? Oh, don't even get me started on the features on this thing. Who the hell is SB? I googled SB Corey Feldman multiple times, and all I could find was Test 1, the song that he's on. It's the greatest mystery in music history. Another mystery is why every single person featured on this record finds a way to make me mad. Ugh. There's corrupt verse on Lickety Splickety. By the way, does Corey know the expression is lickety split? It's been 5 years. He's surely figured it out by now. But Snoop's verse on Go For It, the Angels in the first half, Kaya Jones on Forbidden Love, and the Fred Durst feature in Seamless. No matter what happens, everyone here is contributing to some of the worst bars and lyrical ideas I have ever heard. Period. And let's zoom in on Fred Durst for a second here, because he is swearing in his verse, and it's censored for some reason, because I guess Fred fucking Durst is too aggressive for us listeners. But then Corey's saying shit on Ya Got Me a couple tracks later. I just don't get it. Oh yes, and why do about half of the tracks in the first half end with them having a laugh in the studio? It's cute for a track or two, and then it just becomes groan-worthy, and it shows the lack of discipline throughout the record. Oh my god. There is so much to unpack about this album. I swear to God. Ugh. I asked earlier on in this review what the theme / identity of this album is. Well, lyrics don't really help with that. So you get to the first 30 seconds or so of Ascension Millennium, the opener, and you get to the voice of God to welcome you into the ride of a lifetime. The second song does that too, and you're like, okay, this could be decent. Sure, this could almost be good. Then you get the Charlie's Angels skits with Batman with a horny Corey Feldman telling the Angels to do stuff that revolves around making people happy and to, and I quote, be sexy. That's a recurring theme, I guess, but Corey just really doesn't commit to that fully, only with a handful of tracks. Despite Corey shoehorning all the titles of the forthcoming songs in the first half at the beginning skit of the title track, alluding to a more cohesive story, I just can't find that story thanks to that lack of commitment. It's just words passing by my head. I already mentioned the "there's a disc 2" thing at the end of Test 1, which is, by the way, the most distraught I've ever been going into the second disc of an album, because it just comes out of nowhere, and the songs before that moment were all terrible. The second half is basically a rock album with zero cohesion, with the voice of God at the very end to tell you another piece of grim news. This album loops. But beyond that, all the angels and the demon voices are gone. Just gone. I would give you an in-depth lyrical analysis of Angelic to the Core, but for the life of me, I couldn't find most of the lyrics. I use Genius to read song lyrics and to get a little more insight on an album and what the artist was going for, or at least what people think the artist was going for. But for the most part, I was left with a lyrics to be added message. And this was the case even with a little bit of digging. No one seems to want to listen to this album multiple times over to figure out what the hell Corey Feldman is saying for most of this album. Just the beginning and a few legendarily bad cuts at the end. Even if they were all easy to find, it would still just be words flying by me most of the time. But that's not to say that this record doesn't have at least a little heart to it. It does. Corey Feldman is truly expressing himself and putting his heart on his sleeve. It's just overshadowed by, well, everything. God, I still need to do a conclusion, eh? What's left to say about this album besides the cover art that screams in papyrus font, "Graphic design is my passion"? An album that makes an hour and a half feel like 3 years. If any one of these given songs were on any other album, and I mean any album, that song would be the worst track on that album. No question. Sound quality sounds cheap and awful. Mixing doesn't know what to do with many elements to juggle, nor what to do with fewer. Effects are just kind of there, and they make this album more nonsensical than it already is. Every instrument on this record is on a spectrum between lame and terrible. Song structure is undisciplined and it feels unfinished. Album structure is a mess too, thanks to the lack of commitment to its own ideas. It's a mishmash of genres, none of which pan out all that well. My fan is going nuts right now. Good God, Corey Feldman's vocals are really bad. He's off key, his tone is awful, and he's not even singing in time with the music half the time. Features are also terrible, boasting some of the worst lyrics I've ever heard come out of a rapper or any artist's mouth. Lyrics are just words if you don't have good things backing it up. As I said, there is a lack of a cohesive identity to this album found in lyrics too. All because it doesn't commit nearly enough to its own ideas. That's not to say there isn't any, or Corey Feldman is this evil man who saddled us with some sort of divine musical punishment as retribution for the world's crimes against him. It's just that the ideas are mostly half-baked, and they fail spectacularly. This album is a massive failure. So massive, in fact, that my own mother, who isn't nearly as involved in the whole music nerd thing as I am, heard about this album. Not because of Corey Feldman's sick dance moves on the Today Show promoting this album, but because it is so legendarily bad. It is epic and awful in the ways that an album like Swan's To Be Kind is epic and excellent. It is the anti-To Be Kind. Angelic to the Core is an album that consistently and epically fails at everything it tries to do, both trying everything and nothing to fix it. It has been lauded as one of the worst albums of the decade, and perhaps of all time, and I have to say, I agree with this. This is one of the worst albums you could possibly make. May it strike fear into every musical artist's or music listener's heart for the rest of time. Because what other rating would you give something like this? I'm giving this one a 0 out of 10. Well, hope you enjoyed this review of Corey Feldman's Angelic to the Core. Thanks for watching. Seriously, thank you. Let me know your thoughts on this record in the comments below if you were also subjected to it. If you want to hear more of me talk, subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss anything. If you want to see more of me doing things, check out the Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Martelins Music. If you want just the review stuff, follow at Christened Music on Instagram. If you want all that in the kitchen sink, check out the website, martelinsmusic.wixsite.com/music. That's it. I'm just gonna lie down now. It's pretty late, and this was a pretty bad record. This is pretty bad. Here's some music that hopefully does not sound like whatever I just listened to.